Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. A very good evening. This is Primetime Asia and I'm Khairunisa Nurwahida Haji Muhammad Safri. This week in Primetime Asia, the death toll from a U.S. airstrike on its hospital in northern Afghanistan earlier this month has risen by one after it confirmed the death of a staff member. An international medical charity, Doctors Without Borders, MSF, says the October 3rd attack on the compound in Kunduz city now stands at 23, with 13 staff members killed and 10 patients killed. U.S. President Barack Obama apologized for the bombing, and the commander of U.S. and NATO forces in Afghanistan said it was a mistake. President Barack Obama has meanwhile decided to slow the pace of U.S. troop withdrawal from Afghanistan, so the United States will maintain a force of 9,800 through most of the next year. Originally, the president aimed to withdraw all but a small U.S. embassy-based force in the capital, Kabul, before he leaves office in January 2017. An armada of carriers, cruisers, destroyers and submarines recently gathered off Japan's coast in a display of naval power, the first major showcasing of Japanese military hardware since Prime Minister Shinzo Abe won lawmaker approval for legislation that for the first time since World War II will allow Japanese soldiers to defend their foreign allies. An agreement between the Colombian government and leftist FARC rebels to search for and locate more than 45,000 people who have disappeared over 50 years of war brings conflict with the FARC closer to an end. Over 134 tons of seized drugs in Pakistan worth over $2 billion have been destroyed. Kartini Knox has the details.
Afghan residents and politicians in Kabul have said they supported U.S. President Barack Obama's decision to slow the pace of U.S. troop withdrawal. Reversing policy on Afghanistan, Obama announced last week that he will prolong the 14-year-old U.S. military engagement there, effectively handing off the task of pulling out troops to his successor. Calling it a modest but meaningful adjustment to winding down the American presence in Afghanistan, Obama said Afghan forces were not yet as strong as they needed to be, given a very fragile security situation, and the United States will maintain a force of 9,800 through most of 2016. President Obama had previously aimed to withdraw all but a small U.S. embassy-based force in the capital, Kabul, before he leaves office in January 2017. Under the new plan, troops will be drawn down to 5,500 starting sometime in 2017 and will be based at 4 locations: Kabul, Bagram, Jalalabad and Kandahar. President Obama has been under pressure from his military advisors, Republicans and a bipartisan group of national security experts to keep U.S. forces in Afghanistan, particularly as Afghan forces have struggled in assaults from Taliban militants who briefly took over the northern city of Kunduz. The US-led coalition in Afghanistan ended its combat mission at the end of 2014. And since then, Afghan troops have been in charge of the country's security, with help from US and NATO troops. US military and administration officials have been discussing a slower withdrawal timetable since the March visit to the White House of Afghan President Ashraf Ghani and Chief Executive Abdullah Abdullah. The Afghan president had been more supportive of the U.S. presence than his predecessor Hamid Karzai, who left office last year. U.S. troops were first sent to Afghanistan by Obama's predecessor George Bush, soon after the September 11, 2001 attacks on the United States, in a U.S.-led effort to destroy al-Qaeda and to oust the then-ruling Taliban that had sheltered the militant group. An armada of carriers, cruisers, destroyers and submarines recently gathered off Japan's coast in a display of naval power that showcased Tokyo's latest warships and signaled wider engagement by the U.S. Navy in the Western Pacific. The fleet review in seas off Tokyo was the first major display of Japanese military hardware since Prime Minister Shinzo Abe won lawmaker approval for legislation that for the first time since World War II will allow Japanese soldiers to defend their foreign allies. to balance the military power of an increasingly China. Neighbouring China, which has strained ties with several Southeast Asian countries over territorial claims in the disputed South China Sea, has said it is wary of Japan's defence posture. The centrepiece of Japan's naval lineup was the Izumo helicopter carrier, Japan's biggest warship since World War II. The 248-metre long top, which was commissioned in May, is a highly visible example of how Japan is expanding its military capability to operate overseas. Joining the Japanese Navy were vessels from India, South Korea, Australia, France and the United States, including the Japan-based aircraft carrier, the 333-metre-long USS Ronald Reagan. After reviewing his own fleet, Mr. Abe boarded USS Ronald Reagan, where he tried sitting in a military jet's cockpit in the carrier's under-the-deck cargo hold. Altogether, 50 vessels and 61 aircraft participated in the display, which is held every 3 years. Humanitarian agreements between the Colombian government and leftist FARC rebels to search for and locate more than 45,000 people who have disappeared over 50 years of war is an important step to reaching a peace agreement between the factions. The agreement, reached late last week, addresses a key issue at the negotiations, which reached a major breakthrough in September when the two sides vowed to sign a deal by March. The two sides agreed to create a specialized unit to search for people who are considered disappeared, according to a joint statement between the government and the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or the FARC. Colombia's Attorney General estimates 52,000 people have disappeared during the Latin America's longest war, which has killed some 220,000 people and displaced millions. Victim groups say between 70,000 and 100,000 people may have gone missing. Some captured and demobilized former rebels have already cooperated with authorities to locate remains in exchange for lighter sentences, a task complicated by the rural jungle or mountain locations of many unmarked graves. Human rights advocates and families of the disappeared have warned that unless more bodies located, exhumed, identified and returned to their families, Colombia risks handicapping its post-conflict development. Forensic investigators in the Andean country often struggle with large caseloads and lack of training, funding and equipment. The unit, separate from judicial investigations, will provide families with official reports on information obtained about their missing family members. The government and rebels will also furnish the International Committee of the Red Cross, ICRC, with information about the missing, so the charity can help design search plans. Under the agreement, the remains of identified victims would be returned to their families once they are located. Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos said the agreements brought the government and the FARC one step closer to ending the decades-long conflict. The government and the FARC have been in peace talks in Havana for nearly 3 years. They recently set a deadline of March 23rd to reach a final agreement, which would then be put before Colombian voters for ratification.
No, ellos, todo eso es, hay mucho petróleo.
Pakistani anti-narcotic authorities and the armed forces recently burned over 134 tons of seized drugs from the whole of Pakistan. The destroyed drugs were worth over $2 billion on the international market. The amount seized was made through colossal efforts by related authorities, and some of the seized drugs will be used as litigation in court proceedings as proof of evidence against their criminal activities. There are no heroin factories in Pakistan, and poppies are not grown there, but the origin of drugs was from Afghanistan. The poppies or drugs in the form of hashish and heroin come to Pakistan from Afghanistan, while cocaine comes to Pakistan illegally from Latin American countries.
Welcome back. There's a new trend in China as more and more young university students break out of the monotony of stable jobs and choose to become their own bosses. A recent influx of homeless people to Hawaiian Islands puts strain on services and facilities, prompting state legislature to consider a bill to reunite the homeless with their families on the mainland. South Korea's rice consumption hit a record low of 65.1 kilogram per person last year, while flour consumption was the highest since 2006, as more and more people turned down rice in favor of bread and bagels, boosting business for bakeries. The local bread market has grown at an average of 15% per year since 2005. Kartini Knox has these details and more. Stay tuned.
Every year, hundreds of thousands of Chinese graduates scour the job market for work. For years, an ideal position meant stable employment, pushing pens in an office. But as increasing numbers of university students drive down white-collar wages, a generation of China's youth are choosing to strike out on their own and try their hand at entrepreneurship. The University Students' Venture Park is an example of the hopes Chinese officials have for the country's ambitious youth and their anxiety about their lack of preparation. Designed as an incubator both for experienced entrepreneurs and for current college students considering starting out on their own, it's designed to Silicon Valley standards. A sunny outlook, an open floor plan, lots of glass, couches scattered around, and walls hung with inspirational corporate art and clever slogans about creativity. There are 2 cafes and lots of little nooks for brainstorming. At the entrance, a large sign reads, "Dream Community." And indeed, the students inside are dreamers. Song Cheng-Zhu, a quiet but intense young entrepreneur from Hubei who graduated in 2014, dropped out of his technology job after the monotony made him feel like a robot. Song is one of a generation of university graduates who has chosen to leave the safety of steady but often unrewarding and poorly paid employment to strike out on his own. Optimists see these young entrepreneurs as a step toward building a Chinese version of Silicon Valley, that among these swarms of kids must be the next Jack Ma or Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of the next killer app or biotechnology firm. But skeptics warn that pushing kids who have, for the most part, never held even part-time jobs to rebrand themselves as CEOs is setting them up for failure without having prepared them for success. Entrepreneurs such as Alibaba's Jack Ma and Tencent's Ma Huateng helped make entrepreneurship cool for a generation of students. But what many don't consider is that both of their idols had years of experience before either hit success. Another problem is that the subsidies and support are unlikely to offset other policy barriers to success. China is one of the most competitive environments for small businesses in the world, where both market forces and policy barriers combine to make scaling up difficult. Access to capital is constrained by state domination of the financial system, and at the same time, low-level official corruption and weak support for intellectual property disproportionately impacts startups. Hawaii's homeless population has increased in the last year, putting a strain on local outreach services in Honolulu, according to local service providers. Michael Martinka, a homeless man from Oregon, says he made the decision to leave the Pacific Northwest for Hawaii after researching local benefit programs for the homeless. The island has better medical and other programs to help people. However, the recent influx of homeless people to the Hawaiian Islands, combined with limited space in the shelters, has drained service provider resources. Maui last year had the largest increase, about a 16% increase in recent arrivals, which is about 500 people. The state legislature now is considering a bill that would reunite homeless people with their families back on the mainland. In 2013, the legislature approved a program similar to that, but funding fell through. South Korea is losing some of its appetite for rice in favor of wheat, as bread and pastries become a trendy new staple. From working mothers who find toast more convenient to prepare for breakfast to city dwellers flocking to trendy eateries for baguettes, South Koreans are at the forefront of an Asia-wide trend that has seen wheat demand climb at nearly twice the rate of rice consumption since 2008. South Koreans spent an estimated 6.36 trillion won, or about $5.37 billion last year, on bread, sandwiches, bagels and pastries. However, South Korea's elderly are still looking for restaurants that serve rice. During lunchtime at traditional restaurants in downtown Seoul, steamed rice with soup fills the bellies of the older generation, less keen on the wheat trend. South Korea's rice consumption hit a record low of 65.1 kilograms per person last year, while flour consumption was the highest since 2006, at 33.9 kilograms. SBC Group, which runs Asia's biggest bread-making plant and has about 5,000 bakeries in South Korea after starting the business as a small bakery in 1945, said the local bread market has grown at an average of 15% per year since 2005. With wheat production relatively low in some Asian countries, South Korea only produces about 2% of what it consumes. There is little alternative but to import more of the grain. Australia, Russia, Ukraine, Canada, the United States and Europe have been the chief beneficiaries of higher wheat demand in Asia, seeing collective global exports swell by over 40% since 2005 to 85% of total world trade. The 2015 Bridgestone World Solar Challenge has kicked off in Australia over the weekend, with the most advanced solar cars from around the world setting off from Darwin. Around 47 teams from some 25 countries are in Australia to participate in the grueling biennial 3,000-kilometre race from Darwin to Adelaide. 3 classes of vehicle, Challenger, Cruiser and Adventure, are taking on the Australian outback in the world's largest solar vehicle event. The Elite Challenger class is conducted in a single stage from Darwin to Adelaide, with the Adventure class enjoying a compulsory stop in Alice Springs. This year sees the second running of the Cruiser class, which focuses on the ability to carry passengers and practical design. Team Eidenhoven's vehicle, called Stella Lux, are current world champions and favourites for the Cruiser class. Meanwhile, Team Nuon Holland overcame a scary moment before the start of the race, with their delicate solar panels near accidentally damaged by a member of the media. Event organisers allow vehicles a nominal 5 kilowatts of hours of stored energy. All other energy must come from the sun or be recovered from the kinetic energy of the vehicle. And finally, in Hong Kong, around 2,500 swimmers raced across the island's iconic Victoria Harbour, with Brazilians winning international male and female categories. The race, which resumed 5 years ago, had been suspended for 33 years because of concerns about water pollution. But the male international winner, Alan Do Carmo, said conditions were perfect for the 1.8-kilometre swim. Winner of the international female category, Brazilian Ana Marcela Cunha, said it was a great way to round off days of international swimming competitions in the territory. The swimmers came from all walks of life and ranged from 12 years old to over 60. Winner of the disabled category, Wong Kin Ming, 57, said he raced every year. Hundreds of amateur swimmers with bright orange buoys also rose to the challenge. The cross-harbour race was first held in 1906, when Hong Kong was still a British colony.
That's it for this week's Primetime Asia. We'll be back at the same time next week with more news and features from the Asia-Pacific region. For more news, you can visit our website at www.rtbnews.rtb.gov.bn. I'm Khairunisa Wahida Haji Muhammad Safri, wishing you a good week ahead and good night. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.